It was my son's 17th birthday, and I had thrown together a small gathering in our cozy suburban home. The living room smelled faintly of cinnamon from the cupcakes I'd baked earlier, mingling with the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee that still lingered from breakfast. The kids were laughing, running in and out of the kitchen, music spilling softly from the speaker in the corner. My son, Michael, had invited a few close friends, and one of them was Ryan. He'd been friends with Michael since middle school. Ryan was polite, funny in that awkward teen way, and had a quiet intensity that made him seem older than his 16 years. After the cake was cut and most of the guests had been picked up by their parents, I started tidying up, humming softly as I wiped down the countertops. I thought the house was finally quiet until I realized Ryan hadn't left. He was sitting on the couch, flipping through a comic book, looking a little lost. "You're still here," I said, trying to sound casual, even though a small part of me wondered why he hadn't called for a ride home. I, I wanted to help clean up a little," he said, standing quickly. His voice had that slightly nervous edge that made him seem both confident and vulnerable at the same time. There was something in the way he looked at me, a flicker of hesitation, curiosity, and maybe something else I couldn't quite place. As we worked side by side in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher and putting away leftovers, the conversation started slowly, almost shyly. We talked about school, music, and his plans for the summer. I was struck by how thoughtful he was, the way he really listened and responded, not just with polite phrases, but with actual insight. It was a rare quality in someone so young, and I found myself genuinely enjoying the company. The sun had dipped below the horizon by the time we finished, and the kitchen was bathed in the soft golden glow of the pendant lights. I poured us both a cup of tea, and we sat down at the small table near the window, overlooking the quiet street outside. That's when he looked at me differently, not like a kid, not like a friend's mom, but as if he was trying to gauge if I could understand him. "Can I tell you something?" he asked quietly, almost hesitantly. "Of course," I said, my heart beating just a little faster than usual. He hesitated for a moment, then leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. The words he spoke next were so unexpected, so raw in their honesty, that I felt a mix of surprise and something else, a connection I hadn't anticipated, something fragile but intensely real. It wasn't inappropriate, it wasn't rushed, it was simply truth laid bare in a moment where trust and openness collided in the quiet warmth of my kitchen. I realized then that sometimes the most profound experiences aren't loud or dramatic. They're moments when two people, even across an age gap, see each other fully, and the world outside fades away. That night, I learned that emotional honesty could create a bond stronger than I had ever expected, and it all started with a birthday, a leftover cupcake, and a 16-year-old friend who stayed a little longer than he was supposed to. After that evening, the house felt quieter than usual, though not empty. Ryan lingered longer than most teenagers would, and there was an unspoken comfort in having him around. The next day, he texted Michael to thank him again for the birthday party. But there was also a small, unexpected message for me. "Thanks for letting me hang out yesterday." I felt understood. I stared at it for a moment, a strange warmth spreading through me. Understood. It wasn't just a polite phrase. It carried a sincerity that felt rare in anyone, especially a teenager. Later that week, Ryan came by again, this time to help Michael with a school project. I made some coffee, and we sat at the kitchen table while the boys sprawled out papers and textbooks on the living room floor. I noticed small things, the way he paused before speaking, as if measuring his words, the way he smiled when he caught my glance, almost shyly. It was subtle, but it made me realize how aware he was, how present. We started talking quietly, away from the boys. Our conversation drifted from trivial things, favorite movies, music recommendations, to deeper topics, hopes, fears, and the quiet frustrations that come with growing up. He asked questions about my life in a gentle, curious way, not invasive, just thoughtful. There was a tenderness to his interest, a respect that made me feel seen in ways I hadn't expected. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the kitchen was bathed in that warm amber light I'd grown fond of, Ryan paused mid-sentence. He looked down, then back up at me, and said softly, "I think I'm lucky to have met someone like you. Someone who listens, really listens." His words weren't heavy or dramatic. They were honest, almost tentative, but they struck something deep inside me. I realized then that connection could happen at the most unexpected times, and it didn't always follow the rules we expected. Over the next few days, our interactions became a quiet rhythm. He would come over to work on school stuff, sometimes linger afterward to chat. I noticed myself looking forward to those moments, the easy laughter, the thoughtful conversations, the small silences that felt comfortable rather than awkward. I wasn't sure when it had shifted, but there was a gentle intimacy growing, built on trust and mutual respect, not physicality, not expectation, just genuine human connection. One evening, while we were clearing the dishes together, he said, almost as an afterthought, "You know, sometimes it's easier to talk to you than anyone else." His eyes held that same quiet sincerity, and I felt a lump in my throat. It was strange, unexpected, and profoundly moving. We were from different worlds in many ways, yet in that kitchen, surrounded by the scent of soap and coffee, it felt like we were speaking the same language. I realized then that life had a way of surprising you, not with grand gestures, but with subtle moments of truth, when someone opens up and lets you in. And for the first time in a long time, I felt completely present, completely connected, and quietly, beautifully alive. The days turned into weeks, and our little routine became something I quietly cherished. Ryan still came over to work on school projects with Michael, but our conversations began to drift further from homework. Sometimes we'd linger in the kitchen, sipping tea or coffee, watching the sunlight shift across the countertops. Other times we'd take a short walk around the neighborhood, the crisp air brushing against our faces, leaves crunching underfoot. Those walks became something more than just exercise. They were moments of honesty and reflection, moments where words felt effortless and yet profoundly meaningful. One afternoon, Ryan stayed later than usual. Michael had gone to a friend's house, leaving us alone in the living room. He was perched on the arm of the couch, fidgeting slightly with his hands, and I could feel the quiet tension that often comes before someone decides to open up. "Can I ask you something?" he said softly, his voice tentative. "Of course," I replied, trying to sound calm, even though my chest had suddenly tightened. He paused, looking down at his sneakers, then back up at me. "Do you ever feel like people don't really see you? Like they only see what they expect, not who you are?" His question hit me harder than I anticipated. I realized he wasn't just talking about himself. He was talking about the kind of connection that makes you feel truly understood. I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said quietly, "more often than I care to admit." There was a silence then, comfortable yet charged with something unspoken. I watched him for a long moment, noticing the way the light caught his eyes, the small way he shifted when he spoke, the honesty in his expression. "I feel like I can talk to you," he said finally. "Not because you're my friend's mom or anything, just because you listen, and you care." The simplicity and sincerity of it took my breath away. I realized in that moment how rare it is to find someone who listens without judgment, who engages without expectation. Our conversation deepened, flowing naturally from fears and frustrations to hopes and dreams. I found myself sharing things I hadn't spoken aloud in years, small vulnerabilities, quiet regrets, and secret longings. And he listened, not just politely, but fully, with a maturity that made me both surprised and comforted. As the evening wore on, the light outside faded to a soft, dusky blue. The kitchen clock ticked quietly in the background. At one point, He reached across the table to adjust the edge of a napkin I had carelessly left askew. It was such a small, ordinary gesture, but it felt intimate in a way that neither of us needed to define. There was a mutual respect, a tender understanding, and a shared recognition that this bond was something special, fragile, and real. I realized then that emotional connection doesn't always come in obvious ways. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the little things, the way someone listens, the way they notice the small details, the way they hold space for your thoughts without judgment. And sometimes, just sometimes, it comes from the most unexpected places, like a teenage boy who stayed a little longer than he should have and ended up leaving a mark on your heart. That night, as I closed the door behind him, I felt a strange mixture of longing and gratitude. Our connection wasn't about labels or expectations. It was about understanding, trust, and the rare gift of being truly seen. And I knew deep down that this was a story that would stay with me for a long time, a quiet, unspoken chapter of my life that had shifted me in ways I was only beginning to understand. The weeks that followed had a quiet rhythm, almost like a gentle current carrying us forward. Ryan still came over to work on projects with Michael, but now our interactions carried a weightless familiarity, a shared understanding that didn't need to be named or explained. There was laughter, thoughtful conversation, and sometimes comfortable silences that felt like a warm embrace. One evening, I found myself sitting in the kitchen, the room bathed in the golden glow of the setting sun. Ryan was helping Michael with a science experiment, but every so often he glanced toward me, and we shared a fleeting look that said more than words ever could. It was in those small moments, the tilt of a head, the soft smile, the unspoken acknowledgement, that I felt the depth of our connection. After Michael went to bed, Ryan lingered a little longer. I poured us each a cup of tea, and we sat at the table by the window, watching the street grow quiet as the last remnants of daylight faded. There was a softness to the air, the kind of evening where the world feels paused, giving space for reflection. "You've changed how I see things," he said quietly, stirring his tea. "Not just the small stuff, but the big things too. I didn't realize how much I needed someone who actually listens." His words struck me deeply. I realized how much I had grown too, how my perspective had shifted, not because of any dramatic event, but because of these quiet exchanges, this mutual trust, and the emotional honesty we had nurtured. I smiled, feeling a mix of warmth and gratitude. "And you've reminded me," I said softly, "that connection doesn't have an age limit. That sometimes the right people come into your life unexpectedly, and they leave a mark you didn't even know you needed." He nodded, his expression thoughtful, almost wistful. "I guess that's what makes it special," he said. "It's real, and it's rare." As he finally said goodbye and stepped out into the cool night air, I felt a strange combination of melancholy and peace. There was no need for grand gestures or dramatic conclusions. The significance of what had unfolded between us was quiet, subtle, and enduring. It was in the honesty, the shared moments, and the mutual respect that defined every interaction. I sat back in the kitchen, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant chirp of crickets. I reflected on how unexpectedly life can gift you profound experiences, ones that don't shout for attention but quietly reshape your heart. That night, I understood that connection, true connection, is about being seen, being heard, and being accepted without pretense. And in that quiet understanding, I felt an unexpected but deeply comforting sense of growth. Life had reminded me that beauty often comes in the form of simple, honest human connection, and sometimes the most unforgettable moments happen in the unlikeliest of ways, leaving you changed forever. As I turned off the kitchen light and closed the door to the night, I smiled softly, carrying with me the warmth of a bond that was sincere, tender, and profoundly real, a quiet story that would linger in my heart always.